Hello, and welcome to the virtual Fairfield Museum. Fairfield Museum is actually open now to the public, but we are continuing to bring you these virtual programs as a way of sharing the history of the town of Fairfield with you and other stories that we have to tell. My name is Walt. My title at the Fairfield Museum is Program and Volunteer Coordinator. And so I am here today in Fairfield's old burying ground, sometimes just known as the old burying ground, here on Beach Road. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the burying ground and also continue our discussion of the events leading up to the attack in 1779, in July of 1779. The old burying ground is indeed the oldest burying ground in Fairfield. It was established in 1639. The oldest gravestone that we can actually identify is from 1687, Samuel Morehouse. It basically only has very hard to read, but there's an S and an M, so we assume it's Samuel Morehouse. He would have died that year, so we think that's the connection. Many of the early gravestones, their markers are missing, although we know that people were buried in this area. Those gravestones, in some cases, there weren't even gravestones. Some of those may have actually had originally just wooden markers, which rotted or degraded over time. And even some of the ones that actually had stones, those stones are like, they look just like regular field stone, and they were crudely carved. And so when they had eroded and you couldn't read those anymore, people, in a sense, forgot that those were the sites of their graves. So there are sections of this old burying ground that no longer have markers, but we know that there are probably burials there. So this burying ground has a great many burials here connected to the period of the American Revolution. Abraham Gould is buried here, Isaac Jarvis, who had been commander at the fort in 1779. Reverend Elliott and his wife and daughter are buried here. Samuel Smedley is buried here. Caleb Brewster is buried here. He was part of the Culper Spy Ring, which we may at some point take another time and spend a little time talking about that particular spy ring and his role in it, as well as many other men who fought in the period of the American Revolution. There's actually a few that are also buried here that date back to the French and Indian War, and some that obviously date back even farther. But in particular today, we're going to talk a little bit about the grave of Gold Selleck Silliman, which is this grave right here. Gold Selleck Silliman was in Fairfield in 1779. He was at that time married to his second wife, Mary Silliman, Mary Fish Silliman, sometimes she's referenced as. And they lived over in the Holland Hill area of Fairfield on Jennings Road, basically where Overlook and Hunyadi come together on Jennings Road. There's a structure there known as the Orchards, which was their home in 1779. And he was a brigadier general in the militia, the Connecticut militia. He had served at the attack in New York in 76 when the British invaded New York. And so he was familiar with the area, knew the area, and had also seen a change, and many people had seen this change. So in 1776, and we're going to talk a little bit about this change that I'm referencing, what happens is the war moves from Boston. As we know, in 1775 and early 70s and early 76, the British command is basically in Boston, and they are forced out with the bringing of the cannons from Fort Ticonderoga, which are set up in the heights overlooking Boston Harbor, making it almost impossible for ships to move in and out of the harbor to help supply and or move the British troops in Boston. So this makes their position there untenable, and so they make an agreement that they can leave. They leave Boston in March of 1776. And they will go actually to Canada for a while, regroup, figure out what they're going to do, but eventually they move to New York. In 1776, they will actually attack Long Island, Brooklyn, the Battle of Brooklyn as it's known. And this is important to this story because what it does is it shifts the war to Long Island Sound, in a sense, because what will happen is with the British taking Long Island becomes a haven for Loyalists. Now, Loyalists, or Tories as they're also known, are individuals who did not necessarily support the idea of independence and certainly not fighting against the crown. And these individuals in Connecticut in particular, but from other parts of New England, were working to reach Long Island, New York City, since this was now controlled by the British forces, and so they felt safer there. There are different discussions about how many Loyalists there may have been. John Adams, who lived at the time, actually says that there was a third for independence, a third against, and a third that were kind of in the middle. Many historians today believe that it might have been as high as 25% for, 25% against independence, and 50% in the middle. And so that middle shifted over the course in the years of the war. But in the after 76, and certainly by 77, 78, there is a lot of these Loyalists in Long Island. The other thing that starts to change everything as far as the American Revolution goes is the entry of France into the American Revolution on the side of the United States, the colonies. And this really shifts Great Britain's focus. It also focuses their attention here in the colonies that they feel they need to get this over with. France is I sometimes use the term, the eternal enemy of Great Britain during the 18th century. And it's very disconcerting to British citizens in Great Britain to now think that their enemy, their enemy of the time period, is now at war against them yet again, and most of their army has been shipped off here to North America. So this really causes a new focus. They're really trying to, the British forces here are really trying to change the nature of the war and basically end it and get it over with. And to that cause, they, to a degree, they somewhat unleash the Loyalists. The Loyalists, in many cases, were willing to serve the crown in many different ways. Some joined and became part of actual regiments. Some used the idea of the British saying, hey, we need you to help us out. Can you go and capture us some supplies? Can you go and upset balance of interest for the colonial forces where they think they might need to be? And some Loyalist groups take this as somewhat free rein. Remember, the Loyalists had been put into a tough position in the years leading up to the actual American Revolution. Supporting the crown had made you very, very unpopular, and many of these individuals had lost their property, had lost their ability to possibly even return home. And so they saw this new change as an opportunity to kind of take advantage and possibly get a little revenge. So in May of 1779, a group of Loyalists will actually come across Long Island Sound, or the Devil's Belt, it's sometimes referenced during the period of the American Revolution. They will come across and they will actually land in Black Rock, and they will travel, if you will, march, if you will, up to the Silliman's home in the middle of the night, or very early in the morning of May 2nd of 1779. And they will wake up the family. In fact, the Gold Selleck Silliman, when he wakes up, when he hears them at the door, actually gets his musket and points it out into the darkness. We're not sure how much he can actually see, but he tries to fire and has what is known as a flash in the pan. So basically the powder in the pan ignited, but the barrel itself, the powder in the barrel does not ignite, and ergo it does not actually fire. This may have been a bit of a blessing, as the men who had come possibly could have taken the actual firing of that weapon as an excuse to harm people more or done more damage. But because of his attempt to fire at them, they break into the house and they proceed to inform Goldsellick Silliman that they would be taking him. They also take his son William Silliman, and they also take a few items from the home. And they will take William and Goldsellick Silliman back across Long Island Sound to be held in for trade or for well, let me explain what I mean by trade. So the idea is that you could exchange prisoners of like rank. And of course, Goldsellick Silliman, being a brigadier general, at least in the militia, they felt that he might be a good trade to have on their side. So what they did was they brought, they eventually decide that William Silliman is not, he's ill, he's not feeling well, and so they take him and they release him. They actually send him home. They will actually let him return home. But Goldsellick Silliman they keep, and despite various attempts to find a trade for him, they're not able to. And by winter of 1779, Mary Silliman's getting very concerned, and so she enlists the aid of a gentleman by the name of Captain David Hawley, who is actually from Newfield or Stratford. He's from the Newfield section of Stratford, as well as Captain Samuel Lockwood, who's from Norwalk. And they, with the aid of about 25 men, will actually go across Long Island Sound, and they are going to kidnap a gentleman by the name of Thomas Jones, who is a judge of the Superior Court, and bring him back here. Now, in the process, they actually, six of the 25 extra men that the two captains brought are actually captured in that process, but the remainder are able to come back, and they bring with them Thomas Jones. Now, initially, Thomas Jones in November of 1779 is actually kept at or held at the home of Goldsellick and Mary Silliman. So Mary Silliman is actually keeping him. He's staying at her home. And it's mentioned that he wasn't very hospitable, and one can only imagine how awkward it must be to have someone in your home that you're having held there while you're waiting for your husband to be arranged for an exchange. But that exchange won't actually get arranged until the April of 1780, at which time a ship will go from Black Rock. It won't even actually make it all the way to Long Island. They actually meet the ship that's coming with Goldsellick Silliman somewhere in about the middle of the Sound, and they actually make the exchange right there on the Sound, so that Thomas Jones will return to Long Island, and Goldsellick Silliman will return home, where upon arrival will actually have a son who's slightly older than 2 years, who barely knows him, and he actually meets a son who is only about 8 months old. So his youngest son is actually born while he is imprisoned in Long Island. So during that time, there is all these concerns. Raids are happening fairly regularly. We know that Andrew Elliot, the minister the first, what's today First Church Congregational, at that time the Congregational Church, writes that there are raids that happen often at various points along the coast here in Fairfield. He mentions the term weekly visits, and he says, we live, we sleep in constant fear. So these raids on Fairfield are fairly common, and the people are aware of their precarious position right here on the coast, so close to both Long Island and arguably also New York City. Another thing that's going to happen in 1779, in May of it's the 11th of May, so it's only a short period after the kidnapping of Gold-Sellick Silliman, is that a gentleman by the name of Prince and Prime, two gentlemen I should say, Prince and Prime, will petition the Connecticut legislature, and it's important because both Prince and Prime are actually slaves held here in Fairfield. Prime belonged to Samuel Sturgis, and Prince belonged to Captain Stephen Jennings. And so they were both slaves, and they actually had a letter written. It was witnessed. The letter was witnessed, possibly also written. The actual scribing of the letter by Jonathan Sturgis. Now that's a little interesting because Jonathan Sturgis actually owns a slave named Phyllis, as well as her children. So there's this kind of duality here of trying to work towards emancipation, but at the same time having slaves as part of your lifestyle. But they do send the letter. It is still, you can still see it is in the, in the Connecticut State Library. And they have the actual letter. Unfortunately, the Connecticut legislature will not actually pass it. They do not agree with it. And so it doesn't pass. And one of the sad side notes to this story is we don't actually know what happens to Prince and Prime. We do not know if they are ever emancipated by their owners, or how their lives move forward after the events. We are trying to learn some more about this information, but at this time we don't know. And so I just wanted, we have a quote in our main gallery, we have an exhibit about slavery, and there's other stories that continue with that theme. Some slaves actually will fight for their freedom. They will actually serve in the Continental Army or the Navy or the Marines and earn their freedom. We know that there's a gentleman by the name of Peter Nash who actually accompanies his master as part of the Coast Guard here in Fairfield that was being used to guard the coast. As well as there was a gentleman by the name of Edward Lloyd who was actually a slave. He was a teenager, and he would actually leave Fairfield and go to the British lines. He would actually go to New York and serve the British. I'm not personally sure in what capacity, but that is his method by which to get freedom. And many of the slaves were really just interested in gaining that freedom. It didn't matter to them whether it was through the British side or through the Patriot side. They were just interested in achieving that particular goal. So before I close, I'd like to just give a couple of quick quotes. As I mentioned before, we have in our exhibit in the gallery, we have a quote from the actual petition that Prince and Prime wrote. And that quote is, "We have endeavored rightly to understand what's our right and what is our duty, and can never be convinced that we're made to be slaves." And their closing line is, "Let your petitions rejoice with your honors in the participation with your honors of that inestimable blessing, freedom." So unfortunately for the idea of the American Revolution, that seeking of freedom it didn't necessarily come for all peoples. Slavery would continue. In fact, in Connecticut, it would continue until 1848. In 1848, Connecticut will abolish slavery. Connecticut is actually the last of all the New England states to do so. But those are just some stories for today. I hope you've enjoyed. As always, it's a pleasure to do these programs for you guys, you folks, and like I said, I really do hope you've enjoyed. So if you have any other questions or thoughts, you can certainly reach out to us. Our website is fairfieldhistory.org, and you can let us know, your thoughts and anything else that you might like us to work on. So once again, my many thanks, and I look forward to seeing you on the History Trail.